Welcome back, it's Haz here with part 2 of the Big Run miniseries to help you all prepare for this special Salmon Run event happening this weekend. Yesterday we went through the basics and fundamentals everyone should know before moving on, and today we're ready to take another step further and talk about some advanced strategies. This miniseries is 3 parts long, so make sure you watch all of them to get the full picture, as each of them rely on a lot of information that's discussed in other episodes, and missing the basics will only make things worse. Before we start, as usual, if you are also looking for more Salmon Run content and guides, check out the rest of the channel as it's full of additional tips to help you improve. Now let's begin. There are several techniques and strats that you can learn to get better at Salmon Run, but one of the easiest ones is within everyone's grasp, yet barely anyone uses it. Have you ever had waves where the first 5 bosses would all be scrappers, maws, flipper floppers, and steelheads? We all had those, and most likely what happened is your whole team just rushed to the shore to splat them, resulting in 15 golden eggs on the shore, and half of them you couldn't gather because there were too many salmonists to do so safely. For situations such as this, there is an easy strategy everyone can start practicing called luring. Luring means allowing certain salmonid bosses to come closer to the basket first before splatting them in order to have an easier time collecting the eggs, but also to gain extra time doing something else that can help the shift. The most basic example of luring is leading maws or a scrapper following you all the way back to the basket and splitting them there, allowing you to collect those 3 eggs in literally no time, giving you free score. Despite those two being obvious, there's still too many who split scrappers on the shore, and while it's not the end of the world, it does make a huge difference for the team and also gives hints on how the player potentially deals with threats later when things get hectic. And when there are scrappers and maws in the final 30 seconds splatted on the shore and you're still missing quota, now that's a problem. And it's not just scrappers and maws. In fact, 60% of the salmonid bosses can be lured, including steelheads, scrappers, steel eels, maws, flipper floppers, and even drizzlers and slamonlids. The first 5 are pretty straightforward, I think, but in the case of drizzlers and slamonlids, did you know that both of them react to whether there's a player close by or not? Drizzlers will keep jumping towards the basket without shooting a single ink storm until it finds a player nearby, and only then will it start shooting torpedoes. Slamonlids are similar, as when they spawn they will keep advancing towards the basket until they meet a player, and only then will they activate and start spawning additional lessers. I strongly believe that luring has become less popular and present in Salmon Run Next Wave, not just because of the large amounts of new players to Salmon Run, but also the introduction of egg throw, since now everyone has an ability to throw eggs to the basket, thinking it's always better. But that just introduced another mechanic that can be misused and build up bad habits instead of thinking about easier solutions, such as luring. Learning the habit of luring makes a massive difference, not only in efficiency to collect more golden eggs, but also to preserve your ink capacity, as throwing eggs from afar takes more than half of your ink, letting you shoot less and as a result leaving more salmonids on the stage, overwhelming the team. Luring also doesn't have to be hard. It's something anyone can do, and the easiest time to practice building this habit is right at the beginning of each wave. I tend to always just spam this way near the basket until I see what the first bosses are, and if you only lure those first 4 or 5 bosses if possible, that's already huge. But as much as luring is a fantastic strategy to learn, it also has its dangers, and it's not something you should do 100% of the time. In fact, you need to be decisive when you apply it and when you decide not to. As I said, the beginning of the wave is an easy time to practice when it's a good time to lure and when it isn't. There's not a lot of stress on the stage, and it's easy to make a decision what to do. If it's only a few scrappers and maws, you just stand back and wait. But if a steelhead spawns along with a flyfish or a stinger, even though you can lure that steelhead back, it might be safer to just splat it and deal with the flyfish and the stinger fast before things get out of control behind you while doing so. When players keep luring bosses to the point it gets difficult to clear the stage, it becomes something we call overluring. We have all splatted steel eels and scrappers with ease, but when there's a steel eel chasing you with a scrapper and cohawks at the same time, while a stinger is shooting you too, it can become impossible to splat any of them. The difference between luring and overluring is conscious gameplay. Just like in all of Salmon Run, you should try to constantly think what is the best way of dealing with situations to get the best results. There are all types of luring, and you don't have to wait all the way back to the basket. If you can lure a boss halfway close, that's already better than splitting them at the shore. The trick is to always know what is happening on the stage And if a fly fish or a stinger spawns, maybe it's best to stop luring, split the scrapper following you, and immediately swap to clearing the fly fish and the stinger. Or if it's the final 30 seconds of the wave, maybe luring that scrapper back to the basket and leaving the fly fish and the stinger is a better choice, because you will not be able to carry those eggs back, but the scrapper's 3 eggs might be the difference between losing and winning. These are also usually the moments I talked about in yesterday's video when specials could be used. As while you're luring multiple easy bosses back to the basket, maybe it's a lot better to use that killer whale to handle both fly fish and a stinger instead of just dropping everything right there. Before we move on, another thing to discuss about overluring is also the timing. If there's only 20 or 30 seconds left, it's also a major factor to decide whether or not you should lure. Do you have enough time to wait for the bosses to get back to the basket? Or should you split them as carrying the golden eggs yourself will be faster than waiting? These are also factors that are unique to the end of the wave, since you don't have the luxury of time to collect a bunch of eggs near the basket. With luring, it's actually one of the most common sights to see dozens of eggs near the basket, as the priority is to get those eggs near the basket first and only collect them later in the last seconds of the wave when you're refilling your ink tank, since it barely takes time. There are also special cases of luring, and these are most of the night waves from gushers, fog waves, but even grillers and glowfly rush waves. During fog waves, you will occasionally see goldy salmon spawning, and one of the most depressing sights to see is players splitting them near the shore, not just because of the distance, but also because the fog will make it impossible for the rest of the team to see where those eggs are. First thing to know is that goldies during fog waves drop a random amount of eggs that can be just 1, 3, 5, or even 10 eggs. The best practice during fog wave is that the moment you see a goldie, you keep them alive at all costs and lure them back to the basket in hopes to get 5 or 10 golden egg drops from them. Near the basket, it takes no time to collect those eggs, and the whole team can help you with that for absolutely no effort. This is also one of the most obvious and easiest example of luring in practice, and if you aim to score high during big run, these fog waves are also one of the primary and easiest waves to help you with that, as long as you lure those goldies. Another example is for goldie seeking. During seeking, you know how the goldies will run from one gusher to the next, right? And often they do run near the basket before disappearing. In these moments, you can also apply luring, that you apply the most damage to the goldie when it's closest to the basket rather than straight away or when it gets further. This mostly applies to weapons that can deal a lot of burst damage, such as brellas or rollers, or if you plan on using a special. But you see, you are trying to minimize the distance between the golden eggs and the basket so that you have time to gather more. Finally, while it's weird to call it luring, it very much applies to griller and glowfly rush waves too. During these two brutal waves, the most common issue players run into apart from getting splatted is collecting enough eggs to complete their quota. Both the rush wave and griller waves are attacking so relentlessly and fast that you barely have time to pick up eggs, and you have to keep shooting or you will lose. On every single stage, the best methods and strategies developed are all based on the concept of luring, which is why if you look up any griller or rush wave guide, they will tell you to position near the basket. The idea is that if you splat rush goldies or grillers right next to the basket, you don't need time to collect the eggs, since you can instantaneously collect and store them while you keep shooting, and you basically only have to focus on surviving that way. Learning these strategies will not only trivialize most of the problems we face for night waves, but it also makes you a better player for normal waves. In the final part of this video, I'd like to dedicate some time to Salmon called Snatchers. You know those little guys who are flying around the stage collecting and stealing your golden eggs? Yes, those little fellas are actually pretty important to consider, not just because they can steal your eggs, but they can also help you collect a lot more that otherwise would be just lost. In order to make use of Snatchers, it's important to know that there are multiple locations they can spawn from, but each of them will return to the exact same spot they spawned at. This means a Snatcher will spawn, go and collect a bunch of eggs, and they will fly back to the exact same location they came from, and that's incredibly useful to know. This can already be helpful and used to our benefit, especially on maps such as the new Marooner's Bay during high tide. Marooner's Bay high tide is known to be a very long and narrow stage, and if any boss gets splatted at the very end, it can be hard to gather those eggs. But lucky us, most Snatchers do spawn behind the basket. Knowing that, you can start practicing watching out where Snatchers are coming from, and if they do spawn behind the basket, you can just keep them going, as you know they will fly right back, and that is when you want to splat them, when they are right next to the basket. potentially bringing back 5 or more golden eggs or so that otherwise you would never collect. Snatchers are often just forgotten or splatted left and right since they don't pose any danger, and thus, you also don't really have to care about them. But when you see Snatchers full of eggs getting splatted far away that you know was heading towards the basket, it's quite depressing to see. And the more players start to notice these little things, the better Salmon Run will be. Now that I think about it, Snatchers are also very much a good training for luring, since the core essence of luring, if you think about it, is trigger discipline. It's about not shooting everything you see like a madman, but consciously thinking whether or not you should or when you should not splat something. So even if you're not yet ready to apply luring to normal bosses, Snatchers can be a very good and harmless practice on learning how to lure, since you will be actively thinking about whether to splat something or not. As you start practicing and learning luring, you will quickly see the benefits of doing so, and when you see a team of coworkers where everyone understands the power of luring, you will be amazed of how different Salmon Run feels when it's optimized. It's night and day difference. You don't need to stress about luring everything, but if most players would learn to just lure scrappers at least, then the average quality of freelance would have already skyrocketed. So we have to start somewhere at least. In the next and last episode of Preparing for Big Run, we'll take a look at some advanced techniques for collecting eggs through advanced movement, basics of overfishing and how to play aggressively to collect more eggs, but also some general tips how you can improve and generally help your team get more eggs in Salmon Run. Thank you for tuning in for the second part, everyone. Hope this will help you, and I'll see you in the next episode. Take care, and bye-bye.